Welcome to Lake TV's Community Spotlight Show, brought to you by the great folks at COMC, Central Ozarks Medical Center, where your health is their mission. And we're talking with Reverend Jim Long here from the Anglican Church at the lake. That is in Osage Beach, right on the parkway there, kind of in the same area as the Osage Beach City Hall. And you're in an interesting building because it's a combination church and brewery, right?
Right. It was a church, and then the church was sold by the denomination, and the new owner then rented the nave of the church to us. But he built a brewery in the old pastor's office, and so it's called the Sanctuary Pub, and so our church meets in the building that is called the Sanctuary Pub.
Right.
Which, there used to be an old saying about Anglicans: if three or four are gathered, there'll always be a fifth.
Yeah.
Now there's no whiskey there, but they do sell beer and wine at the as you come in. But that we have nothing to do with that.
But and it's interesting because if you go back to early church, like Martin Luther, I think he made beer. Right. I mean,
his wife was a master brewer.
Well, there you go. Right. Yeah. So that's kind of, there's a history between beer and Christians there. So now you as a pastor or a reverend, which is basically kind of the same thing, here at the lake, are you a Missouri guy or did you make your way here somehow?
No, my wife and I were missionaries in Indonesia for the better part of 10 years. COVID kind of collapsed our ability to stay where we were.
Right.
I came home for a brief visit, and my paperwork was negated, and I wasn't allowed to go back.
Uh-huh.
So we still had our apartment, and even our dog was still back in Indonesia.
Wow.
And we were stuck in America. Well, the only positive side of that was that as COVID began to lift a little bit, my wife's family decided to have their reunion at Osage Beach.
Okay.
Her family originally had farms on the bottom of what is now this lake.
Okay.
The bottom land was their farmland.
So her family goes back a long time here.
Her family goes back a long time, and so the Purvis family, if you've ever been to the little corner of Purvis, where they have the post office that they brought up and the graveyard that they moved up onto the shore. So we were just visiting here. And I said, where will we go to church on Sunday? When the family had their reunions, let's say in Georgia, they would have a family service. But because so many of her relatives could get back to their homes for Sunday church, nobody suggested this time to have a family worship service.
Right.
So I had seen a sign that said Lake Presbyterian Church. That's before it became the Sanctuary Pub. And it said a biblical conservative church family. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good place to go.
Yeah.
And so we got some of the cousins and one of my buddies from my days at Baylor down in Texas. He came over from Kansas City. We all converged on this little church. And as we were coming through the narthex, there's a big, tall, old minister there with a long black gown, and he said, well, hey, fellas, where are y'all from? And my buddy Marcus said, well, I live in Kansas City, but my buddy Jim here, who I went to Baylor with, he's been a missionary in Indonesia. And the pastor said, well, hey, tell me about that. And by the time I got through the narthex, I was the guest preacher for that day.
Wow. Wow.
And it turned out that the minister who was presiding had retired several times and had come back really out of the goodness of his heart to try to help them. He wasn't even their original pastor. He had retired to the lake, to fish and water ski and things.
Yeah.
And thought he would use his gifts to help this little church that didn't have a minister. And after church, one of them came up to me, one of the members, and said, could we speak with you? And so I said, well, I guess so. We don't have any big schedule. So my wife and I, there were about 6 things that almost prevented us from getting there. Even my battery died in my car that morning, and it was a rainstorm, but we made it. And he said, look, this church will close in 2 months if we can't find a minister. We can't afford to pay the denominational price. It's like $100,000, and we just don't have any people anymore.
Yeah.
But he said, you're stuck in America. You can't get back to Indonesia. We're stuck without a minister. We can't afford one. But we could do something to help you a little bit. Would you consider coming and preaching to us?
Yeah.
And so my wife smiled politely and patted them on the arm. She had sworn 3 things when she was a young woman. I'll never live in New York City or any city. I'll never be a missionary because I don't want to raise money. And I will never, ever live in Missouri where my grandparents lived, that landlocked state.
Yeah.
Well, in God's providence, a number of things happened that made it obvious that God wanted us here.
Really?
And so I called my bishop and I explained the situation to him. And he said, Jim, as a bishop, I'm authorized to do many things, but interfering with a direct call from God is not one of them. And see, the people had said, what are the chances that of all the places you could have had your reunion, you had it here?
Yeah.
What are the chances that of all the churches you could have gone to, and there are plenty of them around here,
Yep.
that you chose to come to our church? What are the chances that it happened at this very moment where we're in such great need? So in God's great sense of humor, we eventually called them back, and I said, look, I don't really care about money. I'm still running all the ministries in Indonesia. I had 3 church plants that were still operational on some level there. And I said, but we do need a place to stay. I don't have money to just come buy a place. Well, it turned out that one of the families that had been at church that week that we visited,
Yeah.
who are not regular attenders, they actually live up in Iowa, they said, hey, we've got a condominium we're not using right now. They could stay there. Well, when we arrived at this landlocked state, their condominium was right on Lake of the Ozarks. And we had a panoramic view from virtually every room in the house of water.
Wow.
And so I thought that was God's little joke to say to Nancy, you may be in a landlocked state, but I put you where you can see water from every direction. So that's how God, I believe, brought us to the Lake of the Ozarks.
How about that? So she said she'd never be a missionary, married you, a missionary, never live in Missouri, and here she is. All right, so we're talking with Reverend Jim Long from the Anglican Church at the Lake. We'll continue our conversation right after this. Central Ozarks Medical Center, voted Missouri's best and best at the Lake, is recruiting team members due to growth. Amazing employment opportunities for both medical and non-medical positions with competitive salaries and outstanding perks. For more information, go to the Careers tab at centralozarks.org. COMC for the best medical, dental, and behavioral health care. Join a leader. Join our team. COMC, where your health is our mission.
Don't miss out on your favorite show. Watch Lake TV on demand on YouTube, Roku, and Fire TV.
Welcome back to the COMC Community Spotlight Show. We're talking with the Reverend Jim Long from the Anglican Church at the Lake off of Osage Beach Parkway, right over there by the City Hall, Osage Beach City Hall. Yeah. So we were kind of talking about your story of how you got here. You've been a missionary overseas, Indonesia, and all over the world. You come back here to the Lake of the Ozarks. So as a reverend, everybody looks at you like, rock solid Christian guy, never had a doubt in the world. Is that true? Or do reverends and pastors have doubts? Do you have to work on your faith just like everybody else?
There are times I think that everyone has doubts of one kind or another.
Yeah.
I think my big doubts I went through maybe in junior high school.
Oh, really? Okay.
But it's been my experience that the questions that I've had, what I do is I take, if I have a question that I can't answer, I just put it up on a special shelf in my mind.
Okay.
I say, Lord, I don't really understand this. I'm going to put this here because I'm so firmly convinced of God's reality that I can't doubt that, but there are still many things that I don't understand. Why
Right.
does God do things this way and not another way? You look at modern science and how old the earth is or something like that, and you try to put that together with the Bible story. You think, well, how does this all fit together? So everyone has questions,
Yeah.
but my experience has been that God has continued to, not always immediately, but he's given me satisfactory answers to most of my questions. And when you know the basic truth, you can work out the rest of the details. It's kind of like getting married. You find the person that is the one for you. It doesn't mean that everything is worked out already,
Yeah.
but the big decision has been made, and then you work out the little details as you go along. And that's what faith has been like for me.
That's very cool. That's a very cool answer there. What are your favorite Bible verses, being a reverend?
Oh, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble is one.
That's a big one these days. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, when I came here, there's a phrase that keeps coming into my mind. You know, I took over a group of people that were a lot of them were quite elderly, the idea that came to me was strengthen what remains. Strengthen what remains. So I don't know if that's a Bible verse. It may be a verse like that, but strengthen what remains. But God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. That is a direct quotation of the scripture, and I've found that to be true in my life.
So has your family been important to you as a minister, as a reverend, and as traveling around the world? How does the family play into that?
Sure. Well, you have to have a wife that is interested in a certain level of adventure.
Yeah.
And a little bit of being able to kind of put it out there and just count on God to pull you through. So she's been fantastic. In fact, she runs a Bible study here for the ladies of our church that meets every Thursday at the coffee shop on KK.
Uh-huh.
And they're packed in there. They just can't get enough of her
Wow.
Bible studies. And my children also are very helpful in the ministry. One of our most faithful attendees is my youngest daughter's best friend from school. And they're just incredibly helpful. My son runs the sound equipment and the video projector on Sundays. And all of my children have really been helpful to me in the ministry as well as my wife. So that's the ideal, to have a family that's willing to work together.
What a gift that is, really. I mean, what a precious, precious gift that is. Lake of the Ozarks, are you here for good, or could God call you somewhere else?
Well, I still run, I still preach in Indonesia via internet.
Okay.
2 Sundays a month and every Wednesday. And I do go back and forth to Indonesia to kind of try to nourish and encourage the believers there. I have someone's about to be ordained a priest there in the Diocese of Singapore in November. I'll be, God willing, going back for that. I have an Afghani refugee in Indonesia who's training for the ministry. And I have a guy from Scotland who's married to an Indonesian who's now training to potentially be in some kind of full-time Christian service. So I still have my paddle in the water over there.
Yeah.
But this congregation has been very gracious in letting me go back and forth. And so it's a how long will I be here? As long as God wants us here. And we're very happy here.
Yeah.
And we have a warm church family that's very understanding and supportive. And so this may be the rest of my life.
It's kind of all up to God, isn't it?
It's all up to Him. I try not to make any plans that don't include His corrective providence.
Absolutely. He's the Reverend Jim Long. It is the Anglican Church at the Lake. Thank you, Reverend, for joining us. Appreciate it very much. And thank you for joining us for Lake TV's Community Spotlight Show.
You're watching Lake TV.